Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Isabel Clarke, a quiet archivist, finds her life upended when she unexpectedly inherits a vast fortune from a distant relative, Stephen Ullman. To claim her inheritance, she must take on the role of president of Ullman's powerful company, facing fierce opposition from the seasoned board led by CEO Victor Belton. As Isabel navigates this cutthroat world, she draws strength from her family, her mother, Mary, and sister, Isabella, while confronting the painful past, including her bitter divorce from Richard Miller. In a battle for both the company's legacy and her own, Isabel learns that true power comes not from wealth, but from integrity, memory, and the support of those who truly care for her. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The cost of dignity played out in a Madrid courtroom before watchful judges and curious onlookers. A woman is stripped of everything by her husband and his new lover. They mock her, call her fragile, and believe that with a few cruel words and a signed paper, they can erase her from existence. Yet they have no idea that this humiliation will spark an unexpected change, where dignity and the legacy of her family become her greatest strength. What follows is a battle between cold power and unyielding truth, a struggle that endures. And trust me, the outcome will take you by surprise when we witness it together. The sharp sound of the gavel in the Madrid courtroom marked more than just a divorce. It marked the downfall of an entire life. The echo was swallowed by the marble walls, and the air felt colder than it should on a spring morning. The room was filled with faces, some indifferent, others inquisitive, all there to witness an end that, for Isabel Clarke, was also a raw wound. The murmurs of those present slowly faded, and the judge's voice delivered a verdict that was set in stone. The assets were divided, the claims settled, and the small sum she was entitled to barely enough to survive for a few months. Isabel remained still in her seat, back straight, eyes fixed on the papers before her. For a fleeting moment, memories of her years with Richard Miller rushed to her mind, the promises of stability, the family plans that had never come to be. Now the man in the impeccably tailored suit and navy tie sat on the opposite side, savoring his silent triumph. Beside him, Brittany Hayes, Richard's new partner, wore an elegant cream silk dress and earrings that gleamed provocatively in the harsh light. The judge announced the meager amount Isabel would receive, a few thousand in compensation, barely enough to cover 6 months' rent and some minor expenses. A faint smile curved Brittany's lips, and with a voice as soft as it was venomous, she murmured loud enough for Isabel to hear, "Some people are content with so little." Richard tilted his head, a satisfied gesture, as he caressed Brittany's hand across the table. Laura Scott, Isabel's court-appointed lawyer, tried to offer reassurance. She whispered in her ear, "It's almost over. Just sign, and we can leave." Isabel nodded slowly, though a storm of anger and sadness churned inside her. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, waiting for her to break, and that gave her the strength to hold herself together. Richard seized a moment of silence to deliver his final blow. In a measured, almost compassionate tone, he spoke. "Isabel, believe me, this is for the best. You can return to your books, your old papers. That was always your world. The future demands more ambition than you ever had." The comment caused discomfort among the onlookers. Isabel pursed her lips, refusing to engage. She knew that any reply would only feed Richard's arrogance. Brittany, unable to resist, added another cruel jab. She glanced at Isabel's simple, dark blue dress and then at her own white gold watch. "Some people are like museum pieces," she remarked with irony, "and not always in a good way." The judge brought the session to a close, the gavel ringing out once more to mark the end of a chapter in Isabel's life. She picked up the pen resting beside the papers, her hand trembling for a brief moment before she signed with steady determination. Silence enveloped the room. No applause, no smiles, except from Richard and Brittany. It was the expected conclusion, but also the spark for something far more unexpected. Isabel handed over the documents, picked up her simple purse, and her coat, bought on sale the previous winter. She walked slowly toward the door, ignoring Richard's hollow parting words. "Good luck, Isabel. I hope you find your quiet corner." She said nothing in response, her dignity intact, though her heart felt like it was breaking. In the hallway, the gray light filtering through the windows made the world outside seem distant. The muffled sounds of traffic and conversation drifted into the quiet space. Isabel paused, inhaled deeply, and tried to steady herself. Laura approached, offering a kind gesture. "You did well. Now it's time to begin anew." Isabel nodded, though in her mind the words felt almost impossible. She recalled how, just a few years ago, she had dreamed of starting a family in a bright apartment, with Sunday breakfasts and books lining every shelf. Now, those dreams were shattered, like broken glass in careless hands. All that remained were hazy memories and an uncertain future. Still, she forced herself to walk with purpose toward the exit. The waiting room was half empty. An elderly woman gave Isabel a look of silent solidarity, recognizing her pain. Isabel returned the gesture briefly, then moved on. When she stepped outside the courthouse, the sounds of the city rushed in. Cars sped down Geneva Street, horns honked in the distance, and a group of young people laughed on the sidewalk. The contrast with the courtroom's solemn silence was overwhelming. Isabel paused on the courthouse steps, gazing up at the cloudy sky. She silently wondered how she would move forward. The air smelled damp of wet asphalt. She adjusted her coat, hugged her worn leather purse to her chest, and began to descend. Each step felt like a reminder of what she had lost, but also a declaration that she could still choose how to walk the path that was now ahead of her. The murmur of voices, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe, the footfalls of people rushing by. This was the new world around her. For the first time in a long time, she was alone but free. A leap of faith. As she walked away from the courthouse, Isabel's old mobile phone rang. The unknown number caught her attention. At first, she thought about letting it ring, but something in the persistent tone, like the phone knew more than she did, compelled her to answer. "Ms. Isabel Clark?" The voice on the other end was deep and perfectly modulated. Isabel hesitated before replying. "Yes, this is she." The man introduced himself. "I'm Mark Quinlan, a lawyer from the Torre Picasso firm. I need you to come as soon as possible. It's urgent." Isabel furrowed her brow. The formality of his tone felt odd, especially after the morning's events. Cautiously, she asked, "Are you sure you're calling me?" He reassured her. "There's no mistake. We'll be waiting for you in less than an hour." She hung up, trembling. Laura, still with her, asked if everything was all right. "I'm not sure. I've been summoned to Torre Picasso," Isabel replied, her voice shaky. Laura advised caution, but Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that she couldn't let this call go unanswered. She thanked Laura and headed for the nearest metro station. The journey was a blur of thoughts. The subway was crowded with office workers, tourists, and students. Isabel caught a glimpse of herself in the grimy reflection of the window, and saw a woman who was no longer the same person she had been that morning. She didn't know why, but she could sense that something was about to change. At Plaza de Castilla station, the glass and steel towers loomed, cutting through the gray sky. The lobby of Torre Picasso was intimidating. White marble, guards in suits, and receptionists with practiced smiles. A young woman in a gray jacket approached. "Miss Clark, please follow me. Mr. Quinlan is waiting for you." Isabel nodded and allowed herself to be led to a private elevator. The ascent was swift, and she felt a knot form in her stomach. The doors opened to a carpeted hallway, the air heavy with the scent of leather and polished wood. The assistant opened a door to a meeting room, where Mark Quinlan stood. A man in his 60s with neatly combed gray hair, a three-piece suit, and a piercing gaze. He stood to greet her, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," he said. Isabel, still nervous, accepted his handshake. "I must warn you, there's been some mistake." "I'm not connected to your firm," Mark smiled calmly. "Allow me to explain. I'm handling the estate of the late Stephen Ullman." The name stirred something in Isabel's memory. She had heard of him as a child, mentioned in family conversations as a distant, almost shadowy relative. She vaguely recalled seeing him at a funeral, tall and serious, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. Mark opened a leather portfolio and handed her a sealed envelope. "This is Mr. Ullman's will, signed 6 months ago. In it, you are named the sole heir." Isabel stepped back, bewildered. There must be a mistake. "I hardly knew him." "He chose you for a reason," Mark replied, his voice steady. "Your history, your discretion, and your understanding of the past were all key factors in his decision." The minutes stretched as Mark continued. Mr. Ullman had built a vast business empire, spanning energy, logistics, and technology. The figure Mark mentioned, 75 billion, struck Isabel like a bolt of lightning. She felt lightheaded and placed her hand on the table to steady herself. "This is impossible," she whispered. Mark nodded gently. "It's real, but there's one condition. To inherit the full fortune, you must serve as president of the board for 1 year. If you resign, or are forced to resign before that, the entire fortune will go to a global heritage fund. You will receive nothing." A heavy silence followed. Isabel thought of her modest life in Lava Pierce, of the books she catalogued to make ends meet. She also remembered Richard's mockery and Brittany's haughty smile. The situation seemed absurd, like a play she had no part in. Finally, she asked, "And if I don't accept?" Mark met her gaze. "Then you give up what is rightfully yours." Mr. Ullman trusted that you would safeguard his legacy. The word legacy resonated deeply within her. Mark slid a handwritten letter across the table. "He wrote this for you. Perhaps it will help you understand." Isabel opened the yellowed paper with trembling hands. The handwriting was firm, though shaky in places. The letter spoke of his admiration for her commitment to preserving history, of seeing in her the strength to withstand the passage of time. "Remember, Isabel," it read, "it is not weakness to care for what endures. It is strength." Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes, though she fought to hide them. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to her with respect. Someone who barely knew her but understood her essence. Mark waited for her to finish reading before speaking quietly. "Don't feel pressured to decide immediately. The board is a hostile environment dominated by Victor Belton, the current CEO. He expected to be the successor. You will be seen as a mistake, an anomaly." Isabel swallowed. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," the lawyer replied. "Noon is, but you have something they don't. The truth of history and the determination of someone who has already lost everything." Isabel slowly stood up. She walked toward the glass wall that offered an impressive view of Castellana. The cars looked like insects. The sky was overcast. The city continued its indifferent rhythm. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "When do I start?" she asked with a voice more firm than she expected. Mark gave a slight smile. "Today, if you wish. The press release will be out in a few hours. Your life will change forever." Isabel sat down again, still stunned. She thought of her mother, Mary, and her sister Isabella, and how they would react to hearing that news. She remembered Richard's cruel comments. "You were always more comfortable with old papers." Now those papers could become her salvation. The lawyer carefully put the letter back in the portfolio and added, "Get ready, Miss Clark. The first battle will not be in the newspapers. It will be in the boardroom." Her fingers trembled as she picked up her purse. She said goodbye with a nod and went out into the hallway. The elevator returned her to the lobby in a smooth descent, but to her it felt like a leap into the void. Outside, the afternoon was still cloudy, and passers-by walked on unaware that the woman who passed them had just inherited an empire. Mark had warned her, "The board will not accept you easily. Prepare for assistance." The public scrutiny, the cheerful hustle and bustle of the Plaza Mayor seemed to mock Isabel's doubts. After the meeting in Torre Picasso, she'd wandered aimlessly through the streets of Madrid, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. The news of the inheritance, Mark Quinlan's stern face, Stephen Ullman's handwritten letter. It all weighed on her like a secret too big to carry alone. And yet, the first thing she thought of when she left was her mother and her sister. They, with their simple way of looking at life, had always been the refuge she could return to when everything seemed to be falling apart. The Plaza Mayor welcomed her with its open-air theater feel. The terraces were full of tourists and locals. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with that of hot churros. Waiters moved between the tables with loaded trays, discreetly leaving bills under the saucers, as is customary in Madrid. Isabel sat at a table next to the iron railing under an awning that protected her from the soft spring sun. After a while, Mary, her mother, arrived with her slow gait, and her sister Isabella, who always seemed to be in a hurry, even when she had time. "Daughter, what's with that face?" Mary said as she settled into the chair, shaking her floral handkerchief. Isabella, more direct, looked at her intently. "What happened?" Isabel took a breath. For a few seconds, she didn't know where to start. The noise of a nearby organ grinder, the laughter of a group of students, all seemed to form a curtain that made it difficult for her to speak. She finally murmured, "I was summoned to Torre Picasso. A lawyer told me that I am Stephen Ullman's heir." Isabella's eyebrows arched in disbelief. "What are you talking about? That distant uncle we barely saw once." Mary clasped her hands over the table, watching her daughter with a mixture of surprise and concern. Isabel continued, trying to sound firm. "He left me his entire estate, an empire of billions, but with one condition. I have to preside over the board of directors for a whole year." The silence became heavy. The waiter arrived with 3 coffees with milk and a serving of churros. Mary thanked him with a "Thank you, son," and left a coin as a tip on the tray. Isabella sighed, stirring the sugar in her cup. "It sounds like a trap. Those guys in the towers don't give anything away." Isabel nodded slowly. "I know, and yet I felt it was something I had to accept. Mr. Ullman wrote me a letter. He said he chose me because I preserve history, because I know how to recognize what endures." Mary leaned toward her. "Isabel, your life has always been about studying and archives. Maybe he saw in you what others failed to see. But daughter, are you ready for such a cruel world? The question touched her deeply. She remembered Richard's haughty smile that morning, Brittany's hurtful words. Maybe she wasn't ready, but the time had come to stop being the woman who bowed her head. Isabella couldn't help but make a skeptical gesture. Imagine you against a board full of sharks. Don't get me wrong, sis. I believe in you, but I don't want them to tear you apart. Isabel looked at her with tenderness. That's exactly why I have to try. If I resign, everything Mr. Man built will be lost to strangers or go to a distant fund. And I want to prove to myself that I am not the weak person Richard always described. Mary took a churro and dipped it calmly in the coffee. Then in a serene voice she said, "The important thing is that you don't forget who you are. Money comes and goes, but your dignity, your family, those are treasures that no one can take from you. If you accept that burden, do it with a firm heart. We will be with you." Isabel felt a lump in her throat. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried in public, but that maternal certainty gave her strength. The atmosphere in the square remained vibrant. A group of French tourists ordered paella loudly. Some children ran after the pigeons, and in a corner, a street painter was sketching a portrait of an elderly couple. Everything was so ordinary that the magnitude of what Isabel had just said seemed even more unreal. However, looking at her mother and sister, she understood that this was her anchor. Without them, any fortune would be meaningless. Isabella broke the silence again. "So, what are you going to do?" Isabel placed both hands on the table as if clinging to the wood. "I'm gonna try. I can't run away. If I fail, at least I'll know I tried with everything I had." Mary smiled sweetly. "That's my daughter." At that moment, a growing murmur swept through the terrace. Customers turned their heads toward the television hanging on the wall of the cafe. The evening news was broadcasting an urgent bulletin. On the screen, the sober face of a news anchor appeared. Stephen Ullman, a businessman and founder of one of the country's most discreet and powerful conglomerates, has died. The surprise comes with the announcement of his heirs, Isabel Clark, a university archivist residing in Madrid. Isabel's image taken from an art archive at an academic conference years ago filled the screen. Her heart skipped a beat. Mary and Isabella exchanged looks of astonishment. Some customers at the cafe began to murmur, discreetly pointing toward their table. A child even asked out loud, "Is that her?" Isabel remained still with the cup halfway between the table and her lips. The coffee trembled in the saucer. She felt the ground beneath her feet move. There was no turning back. What had until that moment been a secret shared only with her mother and sister was now public news, an earthquake that would travel to every corner of her life. The details continued on the screen. Archive images of Stephen Ullman, headlines that spoke of billions and power. But Isabel barely listened. Her breathing became slow, heavy. She thought of Richard, of Brittany, of how they would react to seeing her name everywhere. She thought of Victor Belton, whom she'd yet to meet, but who would surely see her as an intruder. And she also thought of Mark's calm gaze when he warned her, "The board will not accept you easily." The murmur in the cafe increased. Isabella squeezed her sister's hand under the table, and Mary gently caressed her shoulder. Isabel knew that her life, so modest until then, had just become a public stage. And although fear embraced her, she also felt a spark of determination ignite within her. The first battle. The news ran through the corridors of Cuatro Torres like a fire. An anonymous archivist was the new president. Within hours, newspapers and news channels repeated her name. Old photographs appeared on digital portals, and financial commentators wondered how a woman with no experience in large corporations had inherited one of the country's most discreet and powerful empires. Isabel could barely believe what was happening. Her face, previously invisible to all, was now the subject of debate on radio and television talk shows. After the afternoon in Plaza Mayor with her mother and sister, she had returned home exhausted. The phone did not stop ringing and her email inbox was filled with messages from strangers. But the most important one was from Mark Quinlan. She had to attend the first formal presentation before the board of directors immediately. There was no time for doubt. The official press release was already circulating and expectations were high. That morning, an official car picked her up in front of her modest building in Lava Pierce. As she got out, she noticed a couple of curious neighbors who pretended to take out the trash to look at her. The car drove along Castellana through the intense traffic, and each traffic light seemed like a reminder of how unreal everything was. When she arrived at Cuatro Torres, a few journalist cameras assaulted her. Flashes, extended microphones, quick questions. Isabel got out of the vehicle with her head held high, although inside she felt a whirlwind. A security guard led her inside where the elegant silence replaced the outdoor hubbub. The lobby had shiny marble and a solemn air. Isabel felt small amid so much luxury, but she remembered her mother's words. The important thing is that you don't forget who you are. Our receptionist asked for her ID, and immediately an assistant in a dark suit accompanied her to a private elevator. The journey up was so fast that she could barely breathe. Upon exiting, a carpeted and silent hallway led her to the boardroom. There, an intimidating scene awaited her. An oval table of polished wood occupied the center. 10 directors were already seated, most of the men in impeccable suits, some with gray hair, all with a calculated expression. In the back, next to the panoramic window that showed the Madridsky line, was Victor Belton, the CEO, tall with an angular face, black hair combed back, and cold eyes. He did not stand up. He only nodded slightly. "Welcome, Ms. President," he said in a grave voice. Isabel felt a shiver. She thanked him in a tone she tried to keep firm. To her right, she noticed the gaze of an older woman, elegant, with her hair in a bun and a discreet pearl necklace. It was Eleanor James, a veteran director known for her prestige in business circles. Eleanor watched her with a sober expression without a trace of sympathy. When Isabel sat down in the seat reserved for her, the veteran commented dryly, "Good manners are not enough here, Ms. Clark." The phrase fell like a knife. Victor took advantage of the moment to add, "We are all surprised by your appointment. Mr. Ullman's legacy is complex. It requires experience and vision. We trust that you will know how to listen." Isabel nodded, remaining silent, although inside she was boiling with nerves. Mark, sitting to one side as legal advisor, gave her a slight gesture of support. The meeting began with a general overview of operations. Graphs and screens, figures that looked like mountains of money moving from one side of the world to the other. Isabel listened, trying to understand the technical language, and wrote down keywords in her notebook. She knew that her role was not to speak too much yet, but to show attention. Even so, every now and then she felt mocking glances from some directors, as if they were betting that she wouldn't last a month. Suddenly, Victor interrupted an analyst's report. "Miss President, perhaps you would like to review this document." An assistant placed a thick folder in front of Isabel. "It is a technical report on a possible strategic investment. You can read it and give us your opinion." The trap was evident. A set of pages full of charts and specialized terms that would require weeks of study. Isabel took a deep breath, glanced at the document, and noticed that everything was designed to intimidate her. The directors looked at her with anticipation, some with barely concealed smiles. Eleanor, from her end of the table, sharpened her gaze, intrigued by Isabel's reaction. She closed the folder calmly. "I appreciate the report," she said in a low but firm voice. "I will review it carefully." Victor smiled with irony. "Naturally, we expect nothing less from the president." The tension grew. Isabel felt the urgency to prove something, although she still didn't know how. She then remembered the portfolio she had brought with old documents that Mark had given her that morning. Among them were archived notes from Stephen Ullman about past projects. She opened her folder, and with a serenity that she did not feel inside, she said, "I bring with me some notes that may be useful in understanding how Mr. Ullman viewed these types of decisions." The murmur in the room stopped for an instant. As she unfolded the sheets, Eleanor watched with attention. The director's gesture changed slightly, as if at that moment she recognized that the new president was not completely defenseless. Isabel spoke for a few minutes about the importance of prudence, of how the past offered lessons for the future. She didn't pretend to be brilliant, just authentic. And in that authenticity, she found a point of firmness. At the end, Victor inclined his head. "Interesting perspective," he said in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a compliment. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had changed. She was not the simple spectator they expected. When everything was over, the directors slowly stood up, gathering their papers. Some shook her hand with cold courtesy, others barely nodded. Eleanor put away her documents and before leaving stopped for an instant in front of Isabel. She looked at her without smiling and said in a low voice, "We'll see if you live up to it." Isabel put her things away and left the room with her heart pounding. The echo of footsteps in the hallway seemed to accompany each thought. She knew that this was just the beginning and that the challenges would grow even greater. The resurgence. The courtroom became a battlefield where every word weighed like a sentence. The cold air from the ventilation system contrasted with the tension that grew every minute. The windows showed an overcast sky over Madrid, and inside the directors waited with papers prepared like silent weapons. Isabel Clark entered with a firm step, although inside a knot tightened in her stomach. She knew that Victor Belton had not forgotten the calm with which she had closed the previous meeting, and that today he would seek to corner her without mercy. Victor spoke immediately with that gray voice that resonated like a calculated thunder. "We bring a unique investment opportunity to the table," he announced. A projector illuminated the wall with graphs, figures, and maps. "It is a mining operation in the Congo, a project for the extraction of strategic minerals. that according to our calculations, will generate millions in profits in less than 5 years. The presentation was full of technicalities and financial forecasts. Some directors nodded, others wrote quick notes. Isabel remained silent, watching each slide with attention. She didn't pretend to understand every term, but wrote down keywords as if they were pieces of a puzzle she had started studying the night before. She remembered that she had spent hours reviewing old archives of Stephen Ullman, internal letters, and forgotten memos. Something in her memory pulsed like a warning she still couldn't formulate. Victor continued with an increasingly emphatic tone. "We have a unique opportunity. We need the president's immediate approval to move forward." The murmur in the room grew. Everyone turned their eyes to Isabel. She noticed the pressure, the weight of 10 looks that expected to see her waver. At the end of the table, Eleanor James crossed her arms, attentive to every gesture. Isabel opened her notebook and with a calm voice said, "I appreciate the presentation, but I would like to ask some questions before deciding." Victor gave a smile that was meant to be cordial, though the irony was evident. "Of course, go ahead." She remembered an old report she had read dated 15 years earlier. "According to the documents I found in Stephen Ullman's archive, the same operation was studied in the past. The initial geological report indicated significant seismic volatility in the area and a high water table that made extraction dangerous." The room fell silent. The directors looked at each other in surprise. Victor leaned forward. "That was a preliminary study, Miss Clark. Times change." Isabel did not stop. "I have also read about the political situation. The current Minister of Mines is the nephew of the general who led the 2015 coup. And during that time, all foreign assets were nationalized. Is it prudent to invest billions in a country where ownership depends on the will of a family with a history of corruption?" An uneasy murmur ran through the table. Victor tried to regain control. "Those risks are calculated. The important thing is the profit projection." Isabel interrupted him with serenity. "The important thing is to learn from the past. Stephen Ullman studied this project and rejected it. His final annotation was clear. Only a fool or a thief would build a palace on a fault line." The silence fell like a dull thud. Some directors bowed their heads. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eleanor James put her pin in the table and nodded slightly as if confirming the truth of what was said. The phrase from Stephen Ullman resonated with the force of an echo that no one could ignore. Victor closed his laptop with an abrupt snap. "I see you've done your homework." His tone dripped with contained rage. "But the decisions of the past should not tie us down. The current world demands audacity." Isabel held his gaze. "Audacity without memory is recklessness." The chairman of the table, a gray-bearded director, intervened for the first time. "I think we should reconsider this proposal. If Mr. Ullman had already discarded it, it is appropriate to review the fundamentals with greater calm." Other members nodded, aware that prudence was now the only honorable way out. The vote was brief. The majority decided to table the investment project. Victor clenched his teeth, forced to accept the decision. Isabel took a deep breath, feeling that she had just crossed a threshold. She had survived the first ambush, and she had done so using the weapons she knew best: documents, memory. When the meeting ended, the director slowly stood up. Some came to congratulate her with courtesy. Others limited themselves to a distant gesture. Eleanor approached, leaning on her cane with elegance. "You have cited Mr. Ullman's words well," she said without adding more. Her voice did not sound harsh, but respectful. Isabel perceived a change, as if that woman was beginning to see her differently. Mark, who had followed everything with attention, accompanied her to the hallway. "It was a good start," he commented in a low voice. "Don't let your guard down. Victor will not forget what happened." Isabel nodded, still with the adrenaline in her body. Outside the room, the air seemed lighter. She walked to the elevator with a slow step, as if wanting to engrave every detail of that day in her memory. She knew that the battle was just beginning, but also that she had taken the first step to prove that she was not an intruder. The final victory. The news reached the ears of the one she least expected: Richard. The press echoed what had happened. Digital newspapers ran headlines with catchy phrases, and in the bars of Lavapier, some neighbors commented on the surprising firmness of that archivist who had exposed a powerful board. Isabel tried to continue with her routine, but every time she turned on the television, she found her name in the headlines. Returning to her apartment after a long day of reading and meetings, exhaustion mixed with disbelief, she placed her purse on the table and sank onto the sofa. She had not finished taking off her shoes when her mobile phone began to vibrate insistently. She looked at the screen and recognized the number. She had deleted it from her contacts months ago, but the memory of the heart does not make mistakes. It was Richard. She hesitated to answer, but the persistent ringing finally overcame her resistance. She picked up the phone and heard his voice, an anxious tone disguised as cordiality. Isabel, finally. I've been trying to reach you. Are you okay? She remained silent for a few seconds, measuring each breath. I'm fine, she finally replied with a calmness that surprised her. Richard continued, trying to sound protective. I read about the board. You're in the eye of the storm. Listen to me. This world is dangerous. There are hidden interests you can't imagine. But I know that ground. I could help you. Isabel rested her head on the back of the sofa and closed her eyes. The voice that had once seemed firm and secure now sounded hollow, like a substanceless echo. Help me, Richard hurried. Yes, together we could handle it. I know about finance. You have the position. We would be a team again. In the background, a metallic noise was heard. A door closing and a woman's voice. Brittany, who are you talking to, Richard? He replied in a quick tone. No one, darling. Give me a minute. Isabel's heart beat fast, but not in the way it used to. There was nostalgia, only a painful clarity. Richard insisted. Isabel, don't let those people manipulate you. I can protect you. Our divorce, it was circumstances. I was under a lot of pressure. I know I made mistakes, but I still believe in you. Isabel listened without interrupting. Inside, a battle was being fought. The words awakened old wounds. The humiliation in the courtroom. Brittany's expensive dress. The smile of contempt. For years she had thought that maybe she had been too trusting, too naive. Now she understood that no, she had been generous and he had betrayed that generosity. Vesselance lengthened. Richard interpreted it as an opportunity. If you give me another chance, I can show you that I've changed. I can leave Brittany. It was always you, Isabel. What we lived cannot be erased. Just tell me when we'll see each other and we'll talk. Isabel's hands trembled. She felt the cold run through her fingers just like so many times in the past when Heim posed his will. But this time was different. She took a deep breath and in a serene voice she replied, I will not return to a life that denies me. Richard fell silent, surprised. What are you saying? She repeated firmly. I will not return to a life that denies me. And in that sentence, she was not just addressing him. She was also talking to herself. It was an intimate forgiveness. A recognition that she had endured too much and that she would not do it anymore. The breathing on the other end became irregular. Richard attempted a last play. Don't talk like that. We can still fix it. No one knows you like I do. And I still love you. Isabel looked toward the table where Stephen Ullman's letter still lay. She remembered his words. It is not weakness to care for what endures. It is strength. She understood that she was not alone, that her family supported her, and that a man who had chosen lies could never protect her truth. Goodbye, Richard, she said without a trace of emotion. She hung up before hearing his response. She left the mobile on the table and took a deep breath. The silence that remained in the apartment was different. No empty, but full of a peace she did not remember feeling in years. She stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood life continued at its own pace. A group of young people chatted at the corner bar. An older woman carried shopping bags. A guitarist played a simple chord next to the subway entrance. Isabel felt part of that everyday scene. She was not the defeated woman from the courtroom, nor the unexpected figure in the headlines. She was someone who had decided not to go back. She turned on the lamp in the living room and poured herself a glass of water. The simple taste of the cold water comforted her. Suddenly, the television on a news channel caught her attention. On the screen, Victor Belton appeared in an interview with his calculated smile, he declared. Stephen Ullman's legacy is too great to be left in inexperienced hands. I am confident that responsible decisions will soon be made. Isabel turned down the volume. She didn't need to hear more. She knew that Victor would not give up and that the battle was just beginning. But inside her, something had changed forever. She no longer feared the past or Richard's ghosts. Now she was prepared to defend what had been entrusted to her. With memory as a weapon and family as a refuge, a new legacy, the final victory, the news of the board meeting spread quickly. Digital newspapers ran headlines with phrases like Archivist exposes board and Isabel Clark defeats mining deal. The unexpected outcome turned her into a new kind of celebrity. The public, tired of corporate scandals, saw in her a figure of integrity, a woman who used common sense and historical knowledge to fight against greed. In the bars of Lavapias, her neighbors spoke of her with pride. Isabel tried to continue with her routine, but every time she left the apartment, she was met with smiles and words of encouragement. The phone calls from Richard had stopped, and she felt a great weight lift from her shoulders. She still had to face the board, but now she had a new ally. Eleanor James, the veteran director who had seemed so cold at first, had become her most important supporter. Her quiet respect and her knowledge of the company's inner workings were invaluable. A few days later, after a long day of meetings, Isabel met her mother, Mary, and her sister Isabella at their usual cafe in the Plaza Mayor. The atmosphere was festive. A street musician was playing a codas and couples were dancing with contagious joy. "Tell us everything," Isabella said. Isabel recounted what had happened in the second board meeting, how Victor had tried to push through a fraudulent contract, and how she had stopped him with the unexpected help of Eleanor James. "Eleanor came to me after the meeting and apologized," she said, remembering every word. "She said she judged me without knowing me, and that she would help me protect Stephen Ullman's legacy." Mary smiled tenderly. "That shows the truth finds its way. If even she recognized your worth, it's because you have it." Isabella raised her glass with a determined gesture. "I toast to you, Samsadas, because you knew how to defend yourself, and because you achieved what no one expected." They clinked glasses and drank slowly. Isabel felt a warmth in her chest. A different kind of warmth from the drink, deeper. It was the feeling of being accompanied on the journey, of not carrying a huge weight alone. She wasn't for a few seconds, observing the square. The sun was setting and bathing the walls in golden tones. A guitarist played soft melodies near the equestrian statue, and children ran after pigeons. Life went on, indifferent to her private battles. And in that contrast, she found an unexpected peace. Then she remembered Richard's words in that recent call. High's empty promise to return, his plea tinged with selfishness. For the first time, it didn't hurt. There was no anger, only distance. She understood that forgiving was not about accepting the other, but about freeing herself from the wound. Inside, she said a brief monologue, almost a silent prayer. "I forgive myself for enduring too much, for doubting my own worth. I am not the woman they described. I am the one who chose not to return to that life." The thought brought her immense relief, as if an old weight had fallen from her shoulders. Mary interrupted her thoughts with a sweet voice. "Your Uncle Stephen Ullman left you an empire, daughter, but your greatest wealth is us," Isabella added with a laugh. "And you won't get rid of us, even if you try." The three shared a genuine laugh. And that sound was more healing than any victory in a boardroom. Suddenly, among the tables on the terrace, Eleanor James appeared. Her slow walk and elegant posture caught their attention. She approached Isabel's table and leaned in slightly. "I don't want to interrupt your family moment," she said in a low voice. "I just came to tell you that I was wrong. I judged you before I saw you act. You can count on me. We will safeguard this legacy together." Isabel stood up and held out her hand. "Thank you for being so clear." It was a brief gesture without speeches, but full of meaning. Eleanor left shortly after, leaving behind a feeling of sincere reconciliation. The rest of the afternoon passed smoothly. They ate tortilla, olives, and bread with tomato. They chatted about family memories and old anecdotes. Mary recalled the first time she took her daughters to the Plaza Mayor when they were still little, and how they sat sharing a sandwich watching the pigeons. Isabella told stories of her youth with an enthusiasm that made everyone at the table laugh. Isabel listened and smiled, grateful for the normalcy of those memories. The sun finally set, and the yellow lights of the lampposts illuminated the square with a warm glow. The waiter brought the bill, which Mary paid, leaving a generous tip. "For the good times," she said simply. Isabel thought about how dignity was built in those small gestures in daily interactions more than in grand speeches. In the background, on the screen of a nearby bar, Victor Belton's face appeared in a new interview. Hesed with his usual calculated tone. "This is not over. We will continue to work." Isabel looked at the image for a moment and then turned her gaze back to her mother and sister. A calm smile appeared on her face for the first time since everything had started. She was no longer afraid. She knew who she was and who she could count on. The final thought. As evening fell over, the Plaza Mayor and the golden lights began to turn on. Everything Isabel had experienced in those months settled into her memory like an album of intense pages. The archivist, who one day left a courthouse humiliated, had learned to raise her voice amidst the glass towers, to defend a legacy that was not only economic but human, and to reconcile with herself. Beside her, her mother's serene gaze and her sister's frank complicity reminded her that no victory has meaning without the hands that support us in silence. Even Eleanor James' sober gesture, admitting her mistake, showed that even the harshest judgments can be transformed into bridges of respect when truth is chosen. In this story, a simple yet profound lesson is hidden. True power is not in numbers or titles, but in the ability to forgive and to be faithful to what unites us. Life presents us with unexpected trials, but it is family with its voices, its memories, and its daily gestures that restores our balance to face them, like a lamp lit in the window in the middle of the night. The tenderness of our loved ones illuminates the darkest paths and reminds us that we can always start over. As this narrative closes, a serene invitation lingers. Take a moment to think about the people who have accompanied you in silence, about those bonds that remain firm despite the passage of time. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone close to you, perhaps with someone who needs to remember that it is never too late to care for what truly matters. Because in the end, we are like living squares in the heart of the city where memory, dignity, and love intertwine to sustain one another.